Welcome. In this presentation, we are going to examine the role of voting in citizen lawmaking. Previously, we've looked at the role of interest groups in American lawmaking, but today we're going to focus on individual Americans at the ballot box. And we're going to see that there are three primary mechanisms for citizen lawmaking that we're going to explore. One is the initiative, second is the referendum, and the third is the recall. So let's begin. All right, our starting point is going to be the initiative. Now, this will be kind of hokey, so I warn you in advance. The initiative puts a law in the law books, right? So initiative puts something in. So think of it as the initiative. I did tell you it was hokey. You can't say you weren't warned. And what the initiative does, all lightheartedness aside, is something very important. It allows citizens to directly create laws. Citizens can draft a law and create it themselves. They can then pass that law by themselves. And they can do this even if the government of their state does not want that law to exist. Now, which makes it incredibly powerful. It does require a lot of work. One requires this petition process. This is the example of the petition process in the state of Missouri. There are quite a few steps. I put them and this up here for illustrative purposes only. The point here is not to make you memorize the process, but to show you that it is a lot of work, right? And that you do have to obtain quite a few signatures on your petitions, right, for a statutory amendment, which is something that does not change the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of Missouri, but does change Missouri law by adding a law or removing a law. In this case, with the initiative, we're talking about putting a law in. We see that it takes over 100,000 signatures. To put in a constitutional amendment, it requires 160,000 plus signatures. Right? And if you notice this, according to state law, a petition must have a minimum number of signatures. There's our minimum number in 6 of 8 congressional districts. The minimums are based on the number of votes cast in the last gubernatorial election. So the last time the voters of the state of Missouri picked a governor. So you have to get a minimum number of signatures, and you have to get it from a wide area of the state. You can't just get it in St. Louis County or just in Jackson County, which contains Kansas City in this state. You must obtain that large number of signatures, and you must get them from 6 out of the 8. So 3/4 of the congressional districts in the state of Missouri. From there, in some sense, things actually get a little more straightforward and a little easier. You only have to get a simple majority of votes in an election for a constitutional amendment or a statutory amendment to be passed. Right? Simple majority just means 50% plus 1. So you need to get 50% of the voters plus that one extra person to tip the balance in your favor. That's it. As an example, in 2018, Missouri voters passed Amendment 2, which was the medical marijuana amendment, and that was all done by the initiative petition process. People collected the signatures, it was able to get on the ballot, and then on the ballot, a majority of Missouri voters supported Amendment 2. Medical marijuana was not necessarily something that the state government, the state's elected officials wanted, but Missouri voters were able to go around them and get that done. And this has been done at other points in the history of our state as well. And most notably before your lifetime, but certainly within mine, Missouri roads used to be worse. You may have a hard time imagining that, but they were in fact worse than they are now. And part of the reason for that was money that was raised by taxes on gasoline and diesel that was intended to go for roads was going for all kinds of other things. Missouri's elected officials were taking that money and spending it on other stuff. And so Missouri voters collected signatures and through petition were able to get on the ballot a change to the law that said all of the gasoline and diesel, the fuel taxes that are collected, have to be spent on road maintenance. And that has led to much improvement in the state of Missouri's roads. And is, again, another example of citizens passing a law that the government of this state may not even have wanted, but they can't avoid it when we have gone through that process. All right, next up is the referendum. If you're thinking I just got lazy and left up the same image, no, it turns out initiative and referendum petition process is the same number of signatures, same 6 out of 8 congressional districts required. So that is still a good illustration of the process. All right, let's look at the differences. If the initiative is the initiative that puts a law in the books, the referendum is like a referee, right, throwing a law out of the game. Right? So it takes the law, removes the law. So the referendum allows citizens to directly remove existing laws. And this can be true even if the government easily passed that law. It may have been very popular with lawmakers that were elected by the citizens of Missouri, but that doesn't mean that it's any harder to remove that law. Now, it does require, again, the petition process, the same as for the initiative. And just as with the initiative process, to remove a law through referendum, you only need that simple majority, 50% of voters plus one more voter to tip the balance in favor of that referendum. The most notable example of this, there have been more recent. There was a change to how Missouri would do districting for congressional districts. But still, I think the more memorable and clearer example of this for our purposes is the 2018 Proposition A referendum. And what that did was remove the right to work law from Missouri government. The legislature had very easily passed, and the governor had signed a right to work law for the state of Missouri. And what that meant was if you worked at a business that was a union shop, where previously a majority of the employees there had voted in favor of creating a union for collective bargaining over things like wages and benefits, that when you went to work at that place of business, you had to pay dues, right, a fee for membership to that union, whether or not you wanted to belong to the union or not. You were required by law to pay into that union. Well, right to work laws say, no, you can't do that. And if a person wants to work for a union shop where people have previously voted for collective bargaining, that person can work there. They don't have to join the union. They don't have to pay dues to the union. Right to work is seen as something that weakens unions. That's not a criticism of the law. If you are of a particular political philosophy or economic philosophy, you believe that unions create inefficient businesses and unfairly burden businesses with higher wages, higher costs, less ability to fire employees who don't do their jobs well. And so if you take that view, then weakening unions is a good thing. On the other side of the debate, people also believe that right-to-work laws weaken unions. And, of course, they, being on the other side of the debate, they see unions as a positive force that protect workers from business owners who would take advantage of them, would give them too little pay and less than generous benefits, maybe not great working conditions. And they also saw it as something that weakened unions. Now, the people who were afraid of the weakened unions, and many of them were union members and union organizers, they wanted to overturn this right to work law. And so they set out to collect signatures on petitions, and they passed the threshold, and they were able to get on a ballot for election Proposition A, which repealed Missouri's right to work law. And it was successful. It surprised a lot of people for a red state like Missouri, but something like, I think maybe even just at or right around 2/3 of Missouri voters in that election voted for Proposition A to get rid of the right to work law. And it did. And Missouri went from being a right to work state set by the legislature and the governor to a not right to work state, which is seen as more favorable to unionization and union organizations. Huge, tremendous, and important shift in Missouri law, and done by Missouri's citizens directly against the will of Missouri's elected officials, right? That shows the power of the referendum. All right, the third method here is the recall. And thank goodness to California and Arnold Schwarzenegger for giving us such a clear example of the recall. But first, before we get to that example, let's talk about what a recall is. And a recall is exactly what it sounds like. You guys have heard about recalls for bad lettuce, right? That was making people sick. Turns out this is very much the same thing, but instead of getting rid of bad lettuce, right, the recall gets rid of an unwanted politician. Right? We can have a debate over whether they're really bad or not, but at least a politician that people want to get out. And again, carrying on with our theme of citizens doing things directly, the recall allows citizens to directly fire a politician. Right? Now you're thinking, well, they can always fire a politician. That's what elections are about. And that's true. What the recall does is it allows citizens to directly fire a politician between those normally scheduled elections and to choose a replacement early. So typically your governor's positions are 4 years. What this would be, and as we'll see in the case of California and Arnold Schwarzenegger, it happens in between that 4-year cycle of elections. Right? But this, again, requires a petition process. If you're wondering why I haven't put up that petition graphic again, the reason is Missouri does not have a statewide recall process. I do want you to understand it. It's possible you'll live in a different state. It's possible at some point maybe you'll want to create an initiative that changes Missouri's constitution to allow the recall process. That would be pretty cool in my book as a teacher. All right, and on to our example now. In 2003, Gray Davis was the governor of California, and he was pretty unpopular. And so there was a recall effort that was successful in terms of getting a petition, going through the petition process and getting on the ballot. And in that recall election, California voters were able to remove Gray Davis and choose a candidate to replace him. All right, now, obviously, Gray Davis campaigned for no recall, and he had support from important civil rights, community leaders, politicians. We've got Dianne Feinstein here. She's a longtime senator from California. Jesse Jackson over here, a prominent civil rights figure. So he had a lot of clout on his side. In the end, though, Gray Davis was removed through a recall election, and the citizens of California picked Arnold Schwarzenegger to replace Gray Davis as governor, which, thank you, Arnold Schwarzenegger, for being in a movie called Total Recall. Makes it a nice little image to use for the recall as it applies to citizens getting involved in the process of making laws and picking politicians in unusual ways. All right, and that concludes our presentation. We've learned about these 3 unique ways that citizens can get very directly involved in the process and sometimes circumvent what their government and elected leaders want to do. Again, those 3 methods are the initiative, which puts a law in the books, the referendum, which like a referee takes a law out of the books, and the recall, much like recalls of bad lettuce, that gets rid of an unwanted, undesirable politician. All right, be safe. I will see you next time. If you have any questions about the notes or assignments related to this, please just send me an email.